Chemical and biological agents are often used as a type of warfare, which is described as the military use of bacteria, viruses, toxins, and poisons to kill soldiers or civilians. In chemical warfare, it often leads to serious illness or death, and in biological warfare, it's typically used as a way to target the The history of this type of warfare is very extensive, beginning in ancient days where China would use arsenic smoke to poison people, and Spain would spike their wine with the blood of a leper in hopes that they would contract the same disease. This continued on into 1763, where the British Army would give out smallpox-infected blankets to Native Americans as a way to try to contain them. And it really led to the unrestricted use of chemical and biological warfare in World War I, where on 1915 we see the first uses of chlorine gas and the attacks from Germany, which led to the French creating cyanide gas, and then finally again in 1917 Germany invented mustard gas. Now these could have quite severe repercussions such as burning on skin and even be fatal, and in total it took out about 1.3 million casualties. Due to various treaties and such after World War II, we really see that the use of biological and chemical weapons really slows down. It continues on with the use of napalm in Vietnam, and then again where Egypt used it against Yemen in their civil war, and Iraq used it in the 1980s against Iran, and then finally one of the most recent examples was when the Syrian military used it against their own civilians during the civil war just in 2013. Due to the gross amount of casualties that this type of warfare incited, there was a need for a treaty about it. And this first occurred in 1925 with the Geneva Convention, and this prohibited the use of chemical warfare. One of the issues surrounding it is that it was mostly signed by first world nations, and not even all of them. Like the US and South Vietnam did not sign it, but it was primarily France and Poland that did. Another problem with it is that those who didn't sign it could still use chemical warfare. So it created a lot of problems. This was extended further in 1972 when the Biological Weapons Convention came out, and it addressed some of the initial issues with the Geneva Convention. And so this one also prohibited the developing, stockpiling, and distributing of chemical weapons. Now this one was more widely accepted as first and third world nations signed it, making it a little more effective, but it still had the issue of enforcement, in that if someone went against the treaty, they had no way to stop them. The biggest offenders of this type of warfare has changed throughout history. Pre-1945, it was more of the nations involved in the world wars, including France, Germany, Italy, and the US, and since then it has switched to smaller powers, including Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. In regards to whether this is simply a modern-day problem or one of the past, the answer is neither. It has happened all throughout history and will probably continue on for a while. One of the major differences is that in the past it was more on a larger military scale, such as in World War I, whereas today it The issue surrounding the treaties and how to contain this type of warfare has always been enforcement. Now, one of the new issues that has popped up with it is that this type of warfare is being used by terrorists. And the issue with this is that as they are not their own states, they can't sign the treaties, and more than likely they just won't because that's how they're affected. With the conventions, they are able to place sanctions on those who use them, but military force is impossible. And to go along with this, if a nation wants to use military force, it would have to be on their own. Furthermore, regarding this, it's hard to prohibit a nation from doing something like this because each state has their own individual autonomy, and you can't step on that without major repercussions. It becomes fairly obvious from the continued use of this type of warfare after the conventions that the enforcement methods that we're using are simply not working. What really needs to happen is that we need there to be a certain standard for military force, and when we don't allow that, it's like we're putting our own militaries behind bars, and we're not letting them be effective in the way that they have to be. More turbulent states and terrorist groups are not complying to the current standards that we have, and it's going to remain to be ineffective until we allow ourselves to come out with a greater threat.